If I'm going to be honest, I use the governance report as a Trojan horse almost for culture. When I see people like, the culture, we shouldn't touch that. I'm like, well, what are you actually touching? And that's why I also ask the questions about communication, about joint decision-making, about accountability and oversight. Are we allowing the next generation, rising generation, to have a seat at the table? Those are the components of culture. So if I'm going to define it again, it's our shared norms, which is how we do things, and our shared values.
$2.4 billion. That's the average net worth of the families who responded to the UBS Family Enterprise Governance Report. And yet, for all that wealth, the real questions sound familiar. How do families stay connected? How do they build culture? How do they prepare the rising generation? And how do they create alignment that lasts? Welcome to Visionary Advisor. I'm your host, Alex Kirby, founder of Total Family. In this episode, I'm joined by Mark Tepsich, one of the authors behind the UBS Family Enterprise Governance Report. We talk about what family governance actually looks like at that level of wealth, from family newsletters and non-financial family meetings to practical ways advisors can help families strengthen culture and connect with the rising generation. If you want a clearer picture of how highly intentional families operate and what advisors can learn from them, this conversation is worth your time. Let's get into it with Mark. Mark Tepsich, welcome to Visionary Advisor.
Thank you. Appreciate the opportunity. Look forward to the conversation.
We are talking about the Family Enterprise and Governance Report that came out late last year.
Yeah, I think it was in February, so maybe a month and a half ago or something.
I mean, there's some staggering numbers in the report. The first one probably is $2.4 billion, I think, was the average net worth of the family. So we're really talking about pretty ultra high net worth.
Yeah, it's complex wealth. It is what I would call probably dynastic wealth. And it was, 45% US. The rest came from Asia, Europe, the Middle East, and to a lesser extent, LATAM, as well as North America outside the US. So, but it's, like I said, 45% US.
Okay, so most advisors listening to this might have one or two clients that are, in the billionaire range, but not every single client. So we'll probably take some of this down to the high net worth. But just before we go there, what is the biggest takeaway for you studying some of the wealthiest families in the world? Any surprising thing that jumped out to you?
For one, that 2.4 billion, I mean, that's a big number, but I think the learnings or takeaways would apply to a family with 15 million or 2.4 million as much as it would apply to a family with 2.4 billion or 24 billion. Because it all comes down to how are you preparing the next generation to navigate that enterprise, right? Which is really people-centric. How are you preparing them to navigate it together? What I thought was surprising was I didn't expect, and I want to start this off with a negative, I didn't expect the effectiveness, right, of joint decision-making, preparedness to be as low as it was. It's all under 50%.
Yeah.
But I look at that as an opportunity because the numbers weren't atrocious. That just means, hey, only 40%, if I'm going to use a number, say they are effective at joint decision-making, communication. By the way, it doesn't mean that you are always going to be effective at that. It's just overall. So I didn't expect it to be as low as it was, if I'm being honest. Same thing with preparedness, although that didn't quite surprise me.
Let's do family constitutions, because I've heard you talk about these, on other podcasts. I'm just a fan of yours, Mark. I just go around listening to all of your speaking appearances. Family constitutions, I feel like, are a word that people just say. Yeah. What do you know about family constitutions that we should all know?
Yeah, I think that word is heavy, right? Because if you're coming at it from a U.S. perspective, it's like the Constitution, right? It's like the seminal document.
Right.
I think you wrote this in an email to me, and I 100% agree. It is the process of putting that in place. So you as a family spent the time to talk about who you are as a family, who you want to be as a family in the future, how you're going to make decisions, how you're going to behave together. And if you go through that process, you should be able to throw that document in a filing cabinet and maybe revisit it once every year or every couple of years. But the value add is that process of talking about that stuff, of spending the time and actually memorializing it, right? Because everything is just, hey, we're having a conversation. The larger the family gets, right, the more dispersed. You don't grow up in the same household. You've got cousins that you're co-owning stuff with. So I think that is a value add. The other thing is you don't have to have a 400-page family constitution. In fact, I would say you shouldn't, because you're not going to know what's in there.
Right.
I think the simpler, the more straightforward, the most succinct is better. Even if it's 2 pages and you just start off with, hey, we're just going to define who we are as a family, where we want to be, how we're going to support each other, how we're going to make decisions and behave together. If it's 2 to 3 pages and you're just maybe also defining assets, right, operating company, great. But don't bite off more than you could chew if you're going through that process. And it's not going to be written in like a day or 2 days or 3 days. It's probably going to be a year-long process, if I'm being honest.
Right.
But don't do more than you need, because you could always add to it. And I would say it's going to evolve and it should evolve. Don't calcify it and freeze it, because if you freeze it, that means you can't adapt as a family. And there's one thing about a family, since the beginning of time, you need to adapt to the evolving circumstance of your enterprise or the environment of the world around you. And as you turn on the news any day, this world could change on a dime.
Right.
So yeah, that's my 2 cents on family constitutions.
You don't have to rush to get the document. You don't have to do it in 2 hours or a year. You can just chip away at this document. I think it's really important that people do this work when they have energy to do it.
Yeah.
Not do it under duress.
Yeah.
Because it's like, sometimes the example I use, Mark, is if you've ever assembled like a piece of IKEA furniture while you're angry, you build your anger into the bookshelf.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think when you're doing this any type of governance dynamics work, you want people to be excited about it. And I think it's really hard to sustain that excitement for like, if you said, okay, we're going to do 8 hours a day for 7 straight days until we get a constitution right, that to me is setting the family up for failure a little bit.
100% agree. I do think there is value in maybe a short sprint, right? If it's a couple days.
Yeah.
Because otherwise it's like, hey, we're going to have to spend an hour here, an hour there. And at 3 months goes by and it's like, what did we talk about 3 months ago? But I 100% agree with you. And I look at this governance in general as a continuum.
On the Constitution front, just like staying with this for a second, you referenced the Constitution of the United States. And we have mechanisms to change that through amendments, but we're not changing it that frequent. It's a pretty big deal when you amend the Constitution of the United States. Families are changing constantly through divorce, new people coming in, changes, business, whatever. So to me, like, have you seen anything that you liked that allows the document to be more dynamic? Because to me, like, the Constitution of the US works as a sort of idea, but families are changing substantially more frequently than we are as a country.
Yeah.
Any thoughts on like how other families have done that effectively?
Yeah. I mean, I think one is to, right, if you're going to have it, you're going to put it in place, revisit it either on an annual basis, not the entire thing, but also at different inflection points. And that might not be written into the document, but if you're making it part of sort of a regular or semi-regular practice, you're going to be able to evolve it as you see fit and as it's relevant. But yeah, for a family constitution built for a family of whatever, 12, that's second generation, third generation, and then 15 years later, is it still relevant? Well, if you haven't revisited it in 15 years, it's probably not relevant, right? Because if you think about the U.S. Constitution, like we're having civics classes as a 7th grade and things like that, various tests. There is one story, and I was there to talk about governance, large multi-generational family. There was around a dozen family members in the room between 60 and like 25. And they're like, we have this. The senior generation is like, we have this in place. The next generation, who sort of was clamoring for this constitution, they called it something different though. They're like, what are you talking about? And the senior generation gets his backpack and he pulls out a constitution. And people are like, we've never seen that. We have no idea. Like, they were probably knocking the dust off. It was bound in leather. I'm joking, but it was irrelevant, which maybe 80% of it was still relevant. But at the same time, the value's in the process of setting it up. So just go through, revisit it, affirm it. But if you want to put that in the document to say, hey, we're going to like just review this high level once a year or once every couple of years, I think that's a good practice.
What about the idea that, let's say that my family has a constitution. My father created the constitution for me and my siblings. So now we're using this constitution. But then I marry someone and their family has a constitution. How do you think about the split and the evolution and things related to that? I have my own thoughts, but I'm sure that you guys have seen this.
Yeah. I mean, so your spouse, right, is going to have a different framework, different enterprise than you do, maybe different way of doing things. You are going to have a different way from her. And I think that's fine because generally speaking, what I see is the in-laws aren't really getting involved. There's usually prenups in place. There's trust that own things. So it's protected in that way. Different corporate structures, who can own what part of the business. Where I do think it becomes interesting if you were going to have children, right? Because they are a product of both of those. But again, it's just contextual at the end of the day. So if you want to participate in this family's enterprise, then you're abiding or living within that constitution or those norms or that culture. Likewise on the other side. I don't see a challenge, but this happens with or without a constitution, so to speak, because
right,
your kids are products of two different families. But you see, this is how the family changes, right? So sometimes families have this, it's like, okay, well, I had 3 kids. Everybody that spawns off of those 3 kids is a lineal descendant, and they treat to some guy, 100 years ago. We all have the same mindset. Well, that's not the case because the spouse marrying in, mom or dad, comes from a different sort of enterprise culture, so to speak, or different family culture. So those kids are different. They grow up in different cities. So it's with or without a family constitution. And that could be good, right? It sort of like diversifies how the family does things and thinks about things. And I've seen those in-laws really come in, whether it's a son-in-law or daughter-in-law, and sort of breathe new life. The most famous example of this is the royal family in the UK and Britain, where the king married in, however long ago. And he's the one that's like, hey, we got to actually talk to the public.
Yeah.
But that's like the most famous example of he evolved and adapted the royal family to meet the current day.
Yeah. I mean, like looking at your data, it says that the families who have a family constitution in whatever form that is, over 2 times more likely to rate themselves as effective communicators, 1.5 times effective joint decision-making, and 1.5 times on effective oversight. Clearly, it's not hurting going through this process.
No. What is the downside?
Yeah. It doesn't feel like there's a ton. Do you ever see it not tied to the money? Do you ever see, I think about this with related to the trust, where it's like, I'd love for you to follow these rules. And actually, if you want the money, you have to follow these rules. Do you ever see the governance split out from the money, or is it always tied together?
I mean, it's usually that's why you're coming together, right? Because you got shared assets or resources like coming together to create the family constitution. I will say it's probably incorporated most times because the front matter of that constitution is like, who are we as a family? It's not that, hey, we're real estate developers. Yeah, that could be there, but it's like, hey, we support each other. We support our communities. We're good stewards of the earth, whatever you want, or the cities what we reside in.
Yeah.
I see it baked in that way and then evolving to a little bit more specific on the assets or the operating company and defining like who can be a shareholder and things like that. So that's how I see that, how that is kind of incorporated.
Let's go to the non-financial meetings. The question is, does the family engage in regular non-financial meetings? Yes was 34%, which really surprised me because to me, there's so much good data, so much good anecdotal stories on the benefits of these non-financial meetings and talking about things that are other than money in these meetings.
Yeah.
So did that number surprise you? What else should we know about non-financial meetings from this survey?
The number of families engaging that didn't surprise me, right? Around 34, 35%. It didn't surprise me. And when you think about it, it's really not even like, yeah, it's the specific practice. But why I asked it was it's sort of an indicator of culture, right? If like how you do things, how you think about the family, where you're going as a family. It's just an artifact almost of culture. And certainly you could get together as a family and have dinner, right, on Sunday or Friday night or whatever. Is that a meeting? I don't know. right?
Yeah. Is that a meeting?
I mean, I guess you could, if I was getting graded, I would probably check that box. Because again, if you're going to be a co-owner, right, or share some assets and resources, you can't just show up quarterly and expect to really understand each other, right? So this is sort of an indicator of, are you getting together and just being humans together? But that neutral third-party facilitator plays a crucial role because I've seen it work in person with these families where I'm engaging with Heather and Liam and another colleague of mine, Nicole, where these families know what they need to talk about, let's be honest, right?
Yeah.
And it's usually not as clean cut as like non-financial, which is usually like non-business or non-investment. It is usually integrated. The two are somewhat interspersed, but having that neutral kind of third-party facilitator so people just don't storm off and go into a room and cry. I'm obviously,
Yeah.
but having that sit down, structure the meeting, somebody to like pierce the silence when it occurs is a super valuable thing to do, even if it's just once a year. But that is, again, it's an artifact of, are you coming together? Because again, if you think about the business, the people that are talking are usually only owners and or operators. So this allows families members that aren't in those contexts to have quote unquote a seat at the table, right? And to feel valuable, and they are valuable, right? They just have different roles.
On the non-financial piece of it, Jay Hughes, if we reference Jay's work for a second, financial capital. So when we say non-financial, we're saying non-financial capital. And I think Jay's always pushing the people in his circle that these meetings should talk about the qualitative capitals, the rituals, the culture of the family, the decision-making, the history, and the physical and mental well-being of the family or the habits. Does UBS offer guidance to these families on the agendas, on the topics? If a family says, I want to have non-financial, these non-financial meetings, as someone who does this day in and day out, what is your recommendation on some safe or productive areas for families who are like, well, what else would we talk about besides the money, Mark?
Yeah, we 100% have toolkits. This is not necessarily my area. That's what we call family advisory and philanthropy. But they have toolkits they could deploy for families to bring them together that they've done it for 100 different families. So there's warnings from, but those toolkits allow you to kind of scale those exercises. And one is just getting together and talking about your values, right? So they've got these value cards. You, as a family member, you pick two, go around the table, you talk about why you chose it. You go around the table again, you talk about why you chose the other one. And I'm going to be honest, they could be talking about anything, right? They could be talking about their favorite color, in my opinion. It doesn't necessarily need to be values. Values is just a vehicle. The value is getting together and talking. And that's sort of an ice-breaking exercise to get them to talk about the thing that they want to talk about, which could be philanthropy or the business or something like that. So again, I view it as a continuum of, hey, we need to talk about who we are as a family, where we're going, not specifically with the business, but we'll get there. But we can't talk about the business. We can't talk about who we are as a family and where we're going.
Yeah, values. I mean, we consider values to be a common language.
Yeah.
It's certainly more positive than saying like, Mark is super insert political, not nice word. Like he's super far right, he's super far left, he's whatever. Like you can't really say a bad word on values.
Yeah.
So I think that like, it's like, Mark's so loyal. It's like, it's kind of hard to make it negative. I think one of the hesitations on, if the number is like, if it's 34% for these families, I don't know what the number is for high net worth and below. It's obviously lower.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of advisors or families don't have the resources to bring in that facilitator. Do you feel like a family can do this without a facilitator? And why do you think so many advisors and families struggle to just like get together and have these conversations? Because like, as you said, on the business side, it's like, imagine if you just never had, I know you can have too many meetings in business, and that's probably what happens a lot of times. But like, imagine if you had no meetings ever. That would be hard too. Do you have any thoughts on where the advisor hesitation could come from and who can own it?
Yeah, the advisor hesitation, I'll talk about the advisor hesitation first, and then I'll talk about just not working, just doing it, DIYing it as a family. The advisor hesitation is just, listen, they're profession is investment wealth management, right? And so they feel uncomfortable going outside of that for obvious reasons, right? It's even if you're a physician, you have a specialty and you feel uncomfortable going outside that specialty, as you should. That is the biggest hesitation, right? Like, where does this lead? What does this Pandora's box look like for me? How do I even facilitate this conversation?
Yeah.
On the DIY side, like 100% the families, listen, there are tools out there. I know you know them that families can leverage. Okay. And when you think about it, families have been doing this since the beginning of history. So they don't necessarily need a facilitator. Now, can they benefit from one? 100%. But they could certainly DIY it. What is the harm in that? The harm, I guess, is somebody gets mad, they don't do it again. Well, there's a risk in not having that conversation too. So I would 100% say DIY it. What is the harm? The bigger harm is not doing it, the bigger risk.
Agreed. Yeah, on the advisor front, I agree it's outside of their specialty, but my counter to them usually is who specializes in this then? Because most families don't have access to the resource that is a true specialty, right?
Yeah.
And like, I facilitate multi-generational meetings and I'm highly compensated for it. Like most families can't do that.
Yep.
It's like essentially saying we're better off not doing nothing because the advisor's going to do such a bad job with it. And I just like don't totally believe that. So we're always sort of nudging them to expand their specialty into these areas because they don't have to stand up there and be an expert. I think they can just stand up there and be like that neutral party.
Yeah, listen, I mean, if you're an advisor, your skill set is not only, and it might not even be investment management. It is usually because you're good at relationship management, right? So they have a raw skill set there. They just need to feel more comfortable deploying it. It does help to have a plan and a process and an agenda in place. And like, hey, what questions are we going to, what subject matter are we going to talk about? Let's craft questions around that. So if there's a toolkit, right, or a platform that they could leverage, I think it makes total sense.
I think my favorite idea that I got out of this was the family newsletter, and I'm mad that I didn't think of it. I know it looks like only 12% of people are doing these family newsletters. What did you learn about them? I mean, it seems to me like that would be an interesting thing for a family to undertake.
Yeah. I mean, I have, personal experience with this. I've seen it done in practice with families I've worked for, been employed for in the past, especially as the bigger the family gets. This is why social media somewhat exists. Not that you're going to use social media for this, but I suppose you could. But it is a way to kind of understand what's going on with the family outside of the business realm, right? So it is just a play on it. The interesting thing about it is when you think about it, I think it's very helpful. Remain connected. The thing about it is it's not a face-to-face. It should never be used as like a replacement for anything.
Sure.
Because when you look in that report, the things that have the highest payoff as far as practices are sort of face-to-face practices. So the newsletter shouldn't replace it, but it could certainly enhance and augment some feelings of whatever, being bonded or part of a family unit. But I've seen it where families will have this on the business side. It's like dividends coming. Here's a high level strategy of the business and what we're doing. But they don't talk about anything else, like birthdays, somebody's moving to different cities, somebody's getting married. And maybe it's because family, social media today, it's not, you don't necessarily need it. But again, it's not something specific, branded to the family. Somebody's got to own it, by the way, in the family. I suppose the family office can do it.
No.
But yeah, I've seen it.
No, they can't. I guess it depends what's in it.
Yeah. But I do, again, this, like I put it in there only because I've seen it done up close and personal. I think it's a great value add, but it should never replace face-to-face communication.
I agree with that. Let me give you some other quick thoughts on this family newsletter.
Okay.
Social media can't be the option. It can't be the answer, right?
Yeah.
No one's selling ads in their family newsletter. And family newsletters aren't like addicting, right? Where it's like, I'm infinitely scrolling through family newsletters. I can't stop reading family newsletters. But, when you get Christmas cards, people have started doing these like updates.
Yep.
This person went off to college and this happened and we lost our dog and all this kind of stuff. And as someone who's not on social media, I love this because you don't have a chance always to catch up with your, extended people in your life. And you don't really need an update more than once a year sometimes on people in general.
Yeah.
But on the newsletter, what I wanted to say is that even if no one reads your newsletter, I think it's a good exercise for families.
Yeah.
Because I have 3 little kids. Time doesn't fly. I mean, it doesn't feel like it's flying by, but I know it is flying by, and I will think that one day.
Yeah.
And taking the time to write a page of, hey, this happened, everyone's okay, we're doing this, becomes like a record.
Yeah.
Even if you don't send it to anyone. To me, I think it is actually helpful to the person who's doing the writing of it all. And so I hope that that's something that UBS will encourage families to do, because it's so hard. You have kids, don't you?
Yeah. 2 small kids.
2 small kids. You look back and you're like, I have no idea what just happened in the last 5 years.
Yeah.
Right. But taking some time to write that stuff, I think is really cool, even if no one reads that. You buy into that?
No, I definitely do. That's why I included it in there. You could include pictures in it. It is sort of a rolling thing, right? Once a month, once a quarter. Usually one family member owns it somewhere in the family, right? They like doing it
once a year. Let's say once a year, so we don't freak anyone out.
Yeah, start easy. Right?
Just to start. Yeah, just to start. If you're loving it, go more frequent.
Yeah. No politics in there, right? Solely family stuff. Choose your thing from earlier. But yeah, again, it's what is the harm? There's nothing bad, in my opinion, that could come out of that.
Yeah, I agree. Family retreats, different than non-financial meetings. Family retreats, as defined by UBS, are like offsites, basically.
Yeah. They could be at, a shared family vacation home, or it's like, hey, we're all going to go to whatever, Cabo, first week in January or something. So think of that more as a strategy, meaning like, hey, we're going to have 5 days or 7 days. And every first week in June, we know every year that's when it's going to be. And it's usually a mix. What I've seen is usually a mix of just hanging out, having your kids play with each other, your cousins who you probably only see once a year. And then you also can have some curated meetings on the business or the investments or the philanthropy and things like that, right? So I think it kills a lot of birds with a single stone. There is definitely an art to it. So structuring the agenda. I know a family office executive who took this all on her shoulders. She's an attorney by background and found the place, right? Curates the agenda, gets all the information on the business, gets third parties in there to talk, right? Maybe it's a non-family member who's running the company. So making sure those folks, and you got the block of hotel room. So it could be a lot of work, or it's like, hey, we're going to get together and we're going to have a couple meetings on this, and the rest of the time we're just hanging out.
Some thoughts on the retreat. Our thoughts would be, with our experience, is number one, it doesn't have to be a week in Hawaii or whatever. Every family at every different income level, it could mean going to a campground for a couple of days, right? Yeah. I do think we've heard some horror stories from family offices like what you're describing, catering and food and all that type of stuff. And our guidance there is you have to share the responsibilities with the family. And these are opportunities to bring someone in and be like, hey, can you do the agenda? Can you do the food? Can you do the booking? To me, those are cool ways to involve people. And you don't want the family office ordering the wrong salad. And then you do all this stuff and they're like, what, Mark, I don't like olives.
Yeah.
It's the worst retreat ever. And so I think sharing that responsibility is good. And then the other thing that you said that I love and we strongly encourage is just pick a time every year and just tell people, this is the time that we're doing this. Block this out in your calendar forever.
Yeah.
Know that the weekend after the 4th of July, is the weekend we always plan on going to the cottage and that kind of stuff. So I love the fact that you're talking about family retreats. And it also sounds like you view family retreat as more of an extended family exercise too, where it would maybe be open to more people.
Yeah, because it really is dependent on, right? You could have family office staff there for a little part of it, not the whole thing. The non-family member running the business, maybe an advisor, right? You could see somebody from UBS coming. And then sometimes I've seen it where they'll bring in like a guest speaker that's interesting, right? Just to kind of spice it up a little bit and throw something new in there. Family, everyone, I guess, really likes learning new things. So I've seen it where they've brought in, somebody that's not in the financial or business world. And it's just something unique that they talk about.
I couldn't agree more on that too. Like you could bring a magician. You could have people like we just heard of a family brought in someone to like educate people around AI and let them like do some AI. These are opportunities to grow together. And it doesn't just have to be through that lens of financial. It could just be like, especially if growth is one of your family values. Like I think there's a lot of cool ways to do that.
Yep, I agree.
I want to talk about culture for a second because you use that word throughout this document. How do you define it? I sort of feel a resistance to culture sometimes. Like I think it's such a hard word to pin down that people are generally resistant to it, but they know it's important. Do you have any tips around families or advisors thinking about culture?
Yeah, it does sound amorphous. I don't think it is. There was somebody, a third-party governance consultant I talked to probably a year ago, and he's like, we don't touch the culture. We only touch the structures. And I'm like, well, aren't you? I'm not saying you should come in and like overhaul everything, but like if you can't touch the culture, if I'm going to define culture, it is our shared norms and our shared values. Mm-hmm. Okay, which is how do we do things here? How do we do things in business?
That's what I was going to say. That's exactly how we say it. How do we do things around here?
It's like an organizational culture just applied to the family. Okay.
Yep.
And that's why I also ask the questions about communication, about joint decision-making, about accountability and oversight, and about preparation, because that is, hey, are we communicating and are we collaborative? Are we allowing the next generation, rising generation, to have a seat at the table? Those are the components of culture. So if I'm going to define it again, it's our shared norms, which is how we do things, and our shared values. If I'm going to be honest, I use the governance report as a Trojan horse almost for culture. This is where I'm going with everything. When I see people like, the culture, we shouldn't touch that. I'm like, well, what are you actually touching? Oh, well, the governance structures. I'm like, you're having a governance structure to basically codify on some level the norms. Okay. You can't just say, all right, 7 people are going to be on the committee. Here is what it's governing. Have a nice day. Because a family isn't like an institution, first and foremost. It is, again, how do we communicate, collaborate? Are we collaborative or not? Do we communicate or not? Are we providing opportunities for are we preparing the environment for them to be successful, to navigate this future enterprise as an individual and also together? And that is not, frankly, easy as the family grows and evolves and changes over time, because you may only see each other a couple times a year. Again, shared asset resources, but what is the specific culture within the family as it applies to the business or the wealth, the enterprise, the philanthropy? Culture will outperform, Peter Drucker, whoever said it. Culture eats
Peter Drucker
strategy. Culture eats governance. Okay.
I think culture eats everything.
Yeah. It's listen, we have laws out there, right? We've got the Constitution, but if the norms aren't there, they're frankly meaningless. So you could create a council or a committee, but if you don't want to sit in the meeting with each other and actually be thoughtful and come prepared, then it's worthless. So the culture is really what is setting expectations and things like that. Again, you can formalize it, and I think the bigger the family gets, the more formalization you have to get. But don't think, I'm going to create the structure, it's going to be a silver bullet, because I've met so many families that go through that. They come to us 6 months later and they're like, we did all this, we're feeling really great coming out of it. They're like, what are we supposed to be doing now? And I'm like, yeah, you're supposed to be doing governance, which is just getting together. So we'll create like mock agendas. It sounds easy, but it's really not for the families.
Yeah. Yeah. Matthew Wesley wrote a great piece. I think we're going to talk about it on the podcast, but it was culture eats structure for breakfast, especially for the lawyers. There's comfort in the structure.
Yep. It's tangible.
But, there's also no such thing as no culture. You can be deliberate or you can be accidental, but like ultimately, whatever rules you put in place, if the culture is not doesn't want to abide by those,
Yeah.
or people are going a different direction, those rules ultimately aren't going to matter.
Yeah.
Any guidance for involving the rising gen, or just what you think you would tell advisors that are, because so many advisors are really struggling to like form these relationships.
Yeah.
And I think family meetings are a natural place for those relationships to get stronger and to happen. Any thoughts for advisors who are looking to connect more with the rising gen and the inheritors?
Yeah. I mean, I'll handle that in two parts. One is the family. The other one is the advisors. And I'll speak more from like the family office advisor experience, like being in a family office. You will inevitably have family members calling you, right, and saying, look at this startup, or look at crypto, or look at sustainability or impact. And I'm using the capital, and if you as a family office advisor are like, that's dumb, I'm not going to look at it and waste my time, and neither should you, that family member will never call you again. Okay. They might give you a second chance. They're not going to give you a third, because they're going to say, this guy or girl doesn't want to help me out. And by the way, they may not even really want to invest in it. They just are curious. So if you're looking at capital as a tool, you can't say you can't use the tool. Okay. I guess I would look at it from that advisory lens, because that's just my background being in a family office. The other component, so meet the family where they're at. Don't say, this is what you should be interested in, this is what you should focus on, because that's really what you're doing. If you're saying it's stupid, certainly you could have an opinion and a viewpoint, but like, explain it. Okay.
Yeah. Don't stop them as they're floating the idea. Be like, whoa, let me stop you right there. We're not doing anything with crypto.
Don't do that. And by the way, they're not good. Some family houses, they're like, oh, they want to put their whole net worth in crypto. I don't think I've ever met somebody that the whole net worth might be in crypto, but it's because they invested in it 20 years ago when it was but the family side of things, specifically the wealth creator, they built something brick by brick most of the time. So they're standing on top of the mountain, or standing on top of, the brick house. And they're like, I understand everything about this. And the next generation is standing at the bottom of the mountain, and they're like, I don't know how to get up there. Right. And it's like, well, you got to take the first step. There's a lot of fear with wealth creators, is like, am I going to corrupt the next generation? Right. Am I going to demotivate them if I'm going to show them the number on the balance? Everybody's always like, I'm going to show them the number on the balance sheet. So that it's like, I'm just going to keep them away. I'm going to keep them in the dark. Or the opposite is not the opposite, but it's like, I'm going to create this golden handcuff structure where they can't make a mistake. And I say, I'll give you a couple examples here. One, invite them to have a seat at the table. It's usually not about the net worth statement. There's a lot of other conversations you can have about how things work, and don't sit there and like tutor them. Just bring them to an advisor meeting, right? Or give them a little bit of money, because usually everything's locked up in trust. They don't get to touch it till they're 35. Give them the ability to open up a small account, right? And go start having conversations with advisors. You don't know how to use a tool unless you've actually used it, right? You think about when you learned to ride a bike, you had some training wheels. So allow them the opportunities, prepare the environment for them. So if they're going to make mistakes, it's with a much smaller pool of capital or something like that.
Yeah.
So when they're actually making decisions, it's not this massive insurmountable decision that they've got to make, and it's stressful and it's a burden. There's a million different ways. Just have a seat at the table. The bigger risk is keeping them away, because then it looks like you don't trust them, and they think they have nothing to contribute, and that's what they think you think of them.
I think those are great ideas, and I've heard the not everyone gets a vote, but everyone gets a voice kind of thing. I think even before that is just some shadowing too, inviting the rising gen into a meeting and letting them come along on the trip or go in the meeting, and you don't have to show every single detail of everything that's happening in there. But just like, if you were onboarding an intern at UBS, right? You might be like, hey, why don't you just come in this meeting with me?
Yeah.
That doesn't mean they're going to, run the meeting or talk or something like that. They're in there like literally absorbing what's going on. And then probably when you come out of the meeting, they're like, hey, I have 3 questions. What was this? What was that? And like, what were you thinking when you said this thing? That osmosis can be really powerful too.
100%. I agree with you. You think about that over time, they will start contributing and asking their own questions.
Right. Yeah.
I just see families kind of overthinking that. It's just too much fear, right? They don't see the families are just successful in not having these issues. They only see the stories that are in the tabloids or something like that. So it's like, oh, we got to lock everything up in a trust and throw these terms around it, or just keep them in the dark. And that, again, that just really never works.
Mark, thank you for this report. It's a wonderful report, Family Enterprise Governance Report, that you can get if you follow Mark on LinkedIn or go to the UBS Family Office Solutions page. Any parting words for the visionary advisors out there?
Don't be afraid. And culture is how wealth is built.
That's so good. Don't be afraid. I love that. That is a great way to end, because I'm sure at one point, Mark, you had to facilitate your first meeting, right? And you probably didn't have a lot of confidence the first time that you were leaning into some of these spaces. So I love that message. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you, Alex. I appreciate it.
That's it for Visionary Advisor. Thank you to our guest and to Total Family, whose Family OS software is helping advisors do legacy better. If you're a fan of Visionary Advisor, please subscribe and share it with another top-notch wealth advisor like yourself. We'll see you next time.